Okay, so picking up where we left off and hoping my voice holds out a little bit longer, the second type of decision that we will be faced with is product mix or sales mix decisions. And there's a couple different scenarios here we might see, and I'm going to tell you what we would need to consider in each of those situations and then do a couple problems. So the first one you might see is whether or not we want to drop an unprofitable product or product line. It could be a department in a store. I think we have an example like that where we have a department in a store. It could be a specific menu item on the restaurant, something like that. So the first thing we want to look at is, does it have a positive contribution? If the selling price is more than the variable cost, then it's contributing at least something to our fixed costs, which means if it goes away, the fixed costs are still there, and the remaining departments or products are going to have to pick that up, and they'll become less profitable. So if it's contributing at least something to the fixed cost, then you should probably keep it, given a couple other things. So so let's look at the next one. The next one, are the fixed costs avoidable or unavoidable? And this really changes the whole thing, as you'll see in a couple of problems. Are the fixed costs avoidable or not? Again, it gets back to that differential and about the relevant. If those costs are going to be there, whether you drop this or not, that's one thing. If these costs would go away, then they become much more relevant. Will the sales of other areas will sales of other products be affected? So sometimes this department might not be making a lot, but the people who come here to shop with this are actually buying other products as well. So if I drop this one, the sales in some of my other products or areas could go down. And the other big one is the alternate use of that space or capacity. So I set up here, if it's contributing at least something to the fixed cost, you should probably keep it. The difference would be, okay, if I drop this product line, could I be making something else that would have a higher contribution? So if I wasn't making this product, what would I be doing with it? Could I be making more of something else, or is it just going to sit vacant? So that changes the answer a lot too. We're going to focus here on using the contribution approach. So all that stuff we did in chapter 21, and also we want to make sure we focus on differential costs. What's going to differ between these two alternatives? The second type of decision that you can see here is the product mix decision. And this would be for a manufacturing firm. So you're always going to be faced with some sort of constraint. It might be machine hours, how many hours in a week you can run the machines. It might be labor, maybe one product requires a higher skilled labor and you only have so much of that. It could just be the demand for the product. But you always have some constraint, something that's holding you back, some limitation. So what you want to look at in order to make these decisions is the contribution margin, but not just the total, the contribution margin per whatever that constraint is. So that whatever is limiting you, you want to make sure you get your most bang for your buck on that. If it's machine hours, you want to be spending your machine hours in the way that's going to yield you the highest contribution. And the other thing you'd want to look at is, would the fixed cost change? And there are some situations where it would, and some where it wouldn't. Oops, where'd you go? And then the third type of decision you might see is very similar to number 2 there. This would be a sales mix decision, which would be the same type of thing, except this would be for a merchandiser. And the constraint constraint is almost always going to be some sort of display space. So think about a retailer. So shelf space, floor space, something like that. So they're trying to maximize that. They want to stock with the contribution, the items that will give them the highest contribution. And again, what you do here is the contribution margin per whatever that constraint is. So square foot of whatever, of shelf space, floor space, something like that. Okay, so this is the first one of these that we're going to look at. And this store has 3 departments: men's, women's, and accessories, and they broke down the cost this way. Assume that the fixed costs are assigned to each department include only direct fixed costs of that department. So the salary of that department's manager and the cost to advertise just that department. If they drop a department, they will not incur these fixed costs. So these fixed costs are avoidable, and that's a very important thing to understand to answer the question. Should they drop any of the departments? So what you look at is what would change if I dropped this department. So for instance, if I dropped any of these departments, the revenue would go away, the variable cost would go away, therefore the contribution would go away, and according to the problem, the fixed cost would also go away. So that means this operating income is the effect on my bottom line, which means if I dropped men's, my operating income would go down by $18,000. If I dropped women, it would go down by $8,000. But since this is a loss, if I dropped accessories, my operating income would go up by $18,000. And you could drop one of these and recalculate the total, and this is what you're going to find from this 8,000 number. It's going to go up or down by each of these. That's 8,000. Now, I don't really like the way they do this problem because it looks like you can just jump right to the bottom number and that makes your decision. So I'm going to say, what if those fixed costs are unavoidable? Unavoidable. Which means those are building rent or advertising for the whole store or something like that, and which means those fixed costs would still be there even if I so according to this scenario, we should drop the accessories and our income will go up by 18,000. But if I said that same thing and said that the fixed costs are unavoidable, then you say, all right, the revenue would go away, the variable cost would go away, so the contribution would go away, but the fixed costs would still be there, which means if I dropped the accessories department, my income would actually go down by $3,000, right? Because my revenue would go down by $97,000. My costs would only go down by $94,000. My revenue is decreasing by more than my cost, and so my income goes down by $3,000 if those fixed costs are unavoidable. So if the fixed costs are unavoidable, contribution really becomes your important number here. And that's, you could figure out the impact on your, and again, you could recalculate the whole thing and see that you're going to get that. But if your fixed costs are unavoidable, contribution tells you what the impact on your bottom line was going to be. Other things you'd want to think about are, would sales of other areas be affected by this? Would the sales in women's go down if I drop the accessories? And what else could I be doing with that space? So maybe I said keep this because it's contributing $3,000, but maybe you could expand the men's department, which has an even higher contribution. And so what else could I be doing with that space? So those are all things you'd want to consider. Number 5 here is a product mix decision for a manufacturer. So this store or this company makes storage bins in large and regular. The demand for the products is so high that they can sell as many of each as they can produce. So that's important that we have unlimited demand. The company uses the same machinery for both. The machinery can only be run for 2,800 hours per period. That's my constraint right there. They can produce 11 large bins in an hour or 17 regular bins in an hour, and the fixed costs are $130. Which product should they emphasize? And to maximize profits, how many of both should they produce? So we can see here the unit contribution is the selling price minus the variable costs. So it's $5.20 is the contribution for a regular bin, and $6.70 is the contribution for a large bin. So I can see that the large bins have a higher contribution, but what I really need is contribution per that constraint, which in this case is machine hours. So if I do regular and large, the unit contribution for the regular is $5.20, and I can produce 17 regular bins in an hour. So my contribution per machine hour is $5.20 times 17, or $88.40. The large bins have a contribution of $6.70 each. I can produce 11 of those an hour. So that gives me a contribution of $73.70 per hour. So what that tells me is that 1 hour spent making regular bins gives me a contribution or a profit of $88.40, whereas that same hour spent making large bins only gets me $73.70. So that means I should emphasize the regular bins because they have a higher contribution per machine hour. To maximize profits, how many should I do? And this is where that unlimited demand comes in. So this is question 1. Question 2, I should spend all 2,800 hours making regular bins, and I can make 17 of those an hour. So that says I can make 47,600 regular bins and 0 large bins. And that's going to maximize my profits. If you didn't have that unlimited demand, let's say the market could only support, the most you can sell is 30,000 regular bins. So you max out the one that has the highest contribution per machine hour, and then with whatever excess capacity you have, you would make the large bins then. And what would their operating income be? So we can say, okay, we make, after our fixed costs are covered, our contribution is $5.20 is my unit contribution times my volume, 47,600 bins, gives me total contribution of $247, $5.20. So that's my sales revenue minus my variable cost. So then I just subtract off my fixed costs, which are $130. And my operating income is $117,200. You could have done the sales price times 47,600 minus the variable cost of 370 times 40 minus the fixed cost, but if you've already got contribution, you might as well skip right to that step. And then for the sales mix for a merchandiser, it's exactly the same way, except instead of hours, it would be like square feet of shelf space or something like that. Would be the constraint, but the process is exactly the same. And the last type of question that you can see in here, or outsource or process further. So 2 types of decisions in this area. One is to make it or buy it. The make or buy decision. Should I make this component myself or should I buy it from someone else? Things to consider. The variable cost to make it versus the purchase price to buy it. If I'm outsourcing it, then the purchase price is the variable cost. So the variable cost to make it versus the variable cost to buy it. If there's any avoidable fixed costs, I want to consider those. Again, if they're unavoidable, they're not relevant to our decision. And also alternate uses of that space. If I outsource this, can I use that space then to make something that's going to even yield me more profit or something like that? The second type of decision that you see here is sell as is or process further. So if I make something that is a component in something else, I can sell it as it is, as somebody else's ingredient or component, or I can continue processing it as it gets closer to the finished product, which will make it worth more. It'll sell for more, but it will also add my cost up. We have an example. The problem we're going to do is cocoa powder. So they can sell it as cocoa powder, or that somebody else would use as an ingredient, or they can turn it into finished product. So we compare the revenue if we sell it as is versus the revenue of, I'll say, the finished product if I process it further. Clearly I can get more revenue if it gets closer to the end product. But then I also need to consider the additional costs. So basically the additional revenue versus the additional costs of further processing. And the other important thing here is that all costs up to this point are sunk costs. We call those joint costs. Whether I stop at this point or whether I keep going, the costs up to here are still going to be incorporated in there. That's not going to change. And so again, it's just what's going to differ going forward. Choice A, choice B, choice C. I only want to look at what's going to differ. So I have 3 problems here. The Brady House restaurant is considering whether to bake the bread for their restaurant in-house or buy it from a local bakery. The chef estimates that the variable costs are 54 cents for ingredients, 25 cents for variable overhead, 72 cents of direct labor. They allocate fixed costs, the depreciation of the kitchen equipment and the building, based on direct labor. And so based on that, they assign $1.05 of fixed overhead per loaf. None of the fixed costs are avoidable, which says if none of these costs are avoidable, they're not relevant to my decision, right? The local bakery would charge $1.70. So first they ask, what is the full product cost of baking the bread in-house? So that's going to be the 54 cents of direct material, plus the 25 cents of variable overhead, plus the 72 cents of direct labor. And if it's full product cost, I'm including the $1.05 for fixed overhead. So that means the full product cost is $2.56. And so you might initially say $2.56 to make it in-house, $1.70 to buy it by the bakery. I should definitely outsource this. But we have to remember that this $1.05 is going to be there no matter what. These fixed costs are unavoidable. And if I'm not including it in here, I am going to have to just add it to something else. So because those are unavoidable, those are not relevant. So we can look at it this way. We look at our costs if we make it ourselves or if we buy it from the bakery, and then we look at the difference. So if I make it, my direct materials would be 54 cents. My variable overhead would be 25, and my direct labor would be 72. And if I buy it, the purchase price, 72, is $1.70. Okay, so making it, we've got $1.51. Purchasing it, we've got $1.70. So the difference is 19 cents. If I decide to buy it, if I decide to outsource it, I would save 54 cents, I would save 25 cents, I would save 72 cents, I would spend $1.70. So if this is the case, it's more expensive. So they should make it, if they buy it, they're losing it. They should make it in-house and they would save 19 cents. Because the first, when you look at the full product cost, it looks like they should definitely outsource it, but that would actually be costing them more money. Other things you'd want to consider. So in this case, it says I should keep it in-house. So I would say, or what else could I be doing with that space? So it's saving me 19 cents per loaf of bread to make it myself. But does that? What else could I be doing with that space? Could I use that additional kitchen space to serve people faster and maybe get additional customers in here? Or maybe I could even take that space and add another table or two and make different revenue. So it's possible I could be using that space for something that would yield me even more profit. If the decision came out to outsource it, you would want to consider quality and timing. Are they going to do as good a job? Are they going to make sure they get it to you on time? Are they reliable? All those sorts of things are other things you would want to consider. On this one, Delia Nally manages a fleet of 325 delivery trucks. She must decide whether to outsource the fleet management function. If she does, this other company will be responsible for maintenance and scheduling activities. This alternative would require her to lay off 5 employees. However, her own job would be secure since she's going to be the liaison. If she continues to manage the fleet, she will need the fleet management software that costs $10,000 a year to lease. They will manage the fleet for us for an annual cost of $265,000. So she performed the following analysis. If she keeps it in-house, it's going to cost her $315,000. If she outsources it, it'll only cost her $265,000. So outsourcing will save her $50,000 in the long run. So she should outsource. What qualitative factors should she consider? So again, one of these things, the quality and the timing. Are they going to do as good a job? You would maybe also want to consider the impact on the remaining employees. Are people going to get nervous because you laid off 5 employees and now maybe people are going to start leaving? The ones that you're planning to keep are going to start leaving. You could lose some of your most productive workers. The other one is how long are they going to guarantee that $265,000 price? At that price, because right now at $265,000 it's saving me $50,000. What if I do this? I fire all these people, and then next year they're like, "Oh, your price has gone up to $350,000." Suddenly now I'm losing money. So are they guaranteeing that price for any kind of certain amount of time? What's their reputation? All those types of things are things that you would want to consider before outsourcing it. Here's a make or a process for this. So Chocolicious processes chocolate cocoa beans into cocoa powder for $10,300. They can sell it as is, or they can process it into either chocolate syrup or boxed chocolates. Once processed, each batch of cocoa beans would result in the following sales revenue. The cost of transforming it into chocolate syrup would be an additional $67,000 above the $10,300. To turn it into chocolates, it would be an additional $179,000 on top of the $10,300. The company president has decided to make boxed chocolates due to their high sales value and the fact that the cocoa bean processing cost of $10,300 eats up most of the cocoa powder profits. Has he made the right or wrong decision? Explain your answer. Be sure to include financial analysis. Well, we know that the $10,300 is that sunk joint cost, right? Whether I sell it as is, turn it into syrup, or turn it into chocolates, that $10,300 is there for all of those costs. So it's not really relevant to us. So let's look at it this way. If we sell it as is, our revenue will be $14,500. Additional costs will be none. So my net revenue, or my mini profit here, $14,500. If I sell it as syrup, my revenue will be $104,000. I will incur additional costs of $67,000. So that will be a net profit of $37,000. And if I sell it as boxed chocolates, my revenue will be up to $196,000, but my cost will go up by $179,000. So that has a net of $17,000. So really, the syrup is the most profitable one. That will increase your net revenue by more than selling it as is or selling it in boxed chocolates. But you can see by this one, we just want to look at the differential costs. We just want to look at what's going to differ among these 3 alternatives to make our decision. So there you go. There's 25.